So it's not easy to come up in front of all these people and say what I'm about to say for a variety of reasons. I feel like I shouldn't be up here. I won't be as affected by climate change as people across the world had already been. From Bangladesh to the Maldives, people just like me have already been experiencing extreme effects of climate change and losing their normal way of life as a result. So who am I to come up here and talk about how I will be affected, how I'm scared? The one thing that I have in common with someone struggling to deal with unprecedented flooding in Bangladesh, or another from a small island nation declaring triumphantly that they refuse to die, is that none of us chose this life. None of us chose to be born into this existence. If there's anything that unites all people, it's the fact that we were given no options before we were created and forced into a world that often cares nothing for us. We're condemned to struggle against a cold, frequently uncaring world, and most of us can only do so much to fight back. So this is where my story comes in, where I'm also deeply affected by climate change if nothing is done about it. I know that my world is severely scarred. As I transitioned from the ignorant, carefree years of my childhood into the realities of the world, I was forced to come to grips with the fact that I am condemned to fight against an unjust reality. Those who came before me, whether through malice or just plain ignorance, morphed and contorted the world into something more hideous than most had ever wished. I'm now in the early years of my adult life. Whereas my parents and the entire generation before me had chosen in this period of their lives to continue the human experiment, to usher in the next generation to continue their fight, I find myself hesitating. Hesitating doesn't even do it justice. I find myself revolted, terrified, and embarrassed. When I was younger, I wanted nothing more than to be a parent, and a really good one at that. I idolized my parents, even though I knew that they had significant faults. If I could support another person as much as my parents supported me, I thought my life would have been worth it. I think we all crave this. It's partially in our DNA to seek to propagate the human species and improve upon it at the same time. We desire to be understood by someone just like us. To me, having children and being a parent was the ultimate solution to the existential crisis that we're all faced with. What do we do with our lives? What do our lives mean? And now everything has changed. I no longer feel this drive to will someone else into the world. The world is so messed up. Why would I want to condemn another to an existence that they didn't ask for and will likely result in deep suffering? The climate crisis paints the future in stark terms. Fix it now, or suffer dire consequences for generations. It would be insanity to willingly birth a consciousness capable of feeling pain as deep as your deepest injuries, sorrow as dark as your darkest days, and hopelessness akin to your lowest moments. Just think how awful and hopeless you know that it's possible to feel. How can we reconcile knowingly condemning someone we're going to love with all our heart to struggle through a disaster that we could have prevented? And I know I'm not alone in my trepidation. My generation and that below me are the most vocal against having kids, the most outspoken against continuing the human project. And that in itself should be deeply troubling to anyone who hears it. A whole generation of humans are willing to forego their biological impulses because the world is too screwed up to allow them the chance of permanently ruining the life of an offspring. How low have we sunk to exist in a world of this turmoil? How sad we must be to give up a future for another because our own has been ripped from us without our consent. How daft we must be to not listen to the grieving cries of a generation set up for failure and condemned as fanatical for listening to science.
Right.
A powerful ache resonates from the deepest caverns of my soul because while I know that this crisis is looming, I also know that there are plenty of things that we could do to prevent the worst from coming. Sometimes I wish I didn't know this. Ignorance is, of course, bliss, right? We must then exist in a society that, through true ignorance or feigned ignorance, we live under a government composed of blissful representatives. But the blissful state of our politicians, who may be too scared to absorb and come to grips with this existential threat of climate change, is actively robbing me, my entire generation, and those who will come after me of our present and future freedom. Our country and our representatives are obsessed with freedom, the land of the free, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These rights are said to be unalienable. Well, my pursuit of happiness has been gradually torn away from me as I have to watch my planet decay before my eyes year after year. I now see liberty as a sham, as the self-proclaimed doctrine of American exceptionalism somehow renders our representatives' greedy acceptance of fossil fuel money as a justified action. What perversion of liberty do we live under when the actions of the few can rob the many of their prospects of a livable future? The policymakers of this so-called great nation have ripped from my hands my desire to bring another life into the world. And for what? A few millions or thousands of dollars in fossil fuel donations? For fear of political recourse and losing a re-election campaign? For a worry that a Green New Deal is too expensive or undoable or crazy? It's a true shame that our political system is so destitute that it cannot muster the courage necessary to face a potentially species-ending disaster. Such a large problem demands an equally large solution. The science is clear and in near unanimous agreement. Anything short of courageous political action is unacceptable.
Right.
People will die as a result of inaction. Futures will be ruined if we sit idly by.
Can't do it.
The benefits of fossil fuel donations, pride of winning an election, or fear of rocking the establishment boat will seem so small and inconceivable if the future is wrought with climate catastrophe.
Yeah.
Representative Neal and the world, this is why I stand up and speak. We can do something about this problem. In the process, we can even begin to address the deep inequalities and injustices that exist in our nation and the world as a whole. How could such an appealing prospect be shied away from? We are here to ask you to be courageous, because we will support you if you support us. I will not stop standing up and speaking out until I can firmly believe that my children will not grow up in a world where they have to wake up every day and wonder how things were allowed to get so bad.